What's up, wrestling fans, and welcome to the return edition of The Voice of Wrestling. Yes, this is real life. Yes, I am here. I know some of you doubted us. Some of you didn't think it was actually going to happen, but here we are, and I'm looking forward to it. We're going to jump right into it because we have a ton of things to cover here on the show, but as much as our fans and people that followed us for years didn't think the VOW show would actually return in its entirety, just none of it would, I actually had my doubts of whether or not this man would be returning to the show, but he is senior editor of ProWrestling.com, a longtime friend of mine, and of course, longtime host of The Voice of Wrestling. It wouldn't be the same without him. Welcome back to the program, Nick Paglino. Nick, what's up, man?
What's up, Chris? What's up, wrestling fans? It is good to be back on the show.
I know, this is great. This is crazy. I mean, obviously, we've been off the air as far as a regular weekly broadcast for probably 4 years now. I know we had a couple of years ago, we did a few shows, but now here we are. And of course, guys, we want to get a couple of things out of the way. voiceofwrestling.net, of course, you can watch all of our shows and check us out there. We actually even have some of our old shows from a couple of years back on there. And then also ProWrestling.com. We're going to be doing some cross promotion there. Of course, they're our official news source as well. Nick, you're over there. Mike Killam's over there. Some friends of the show. So guys, check out ProWrestling.com. Of course, we'll be airing there. And then obviously check us out on Facebook and Twitter at VOW Live. We'll have plenty of content there as well. Not going to talk about all the big plans we have for the Voice of Wrestling brand and what we want to do with everything going forward. But I'm very excited to be back. This has been a long time coming. A lot of people have asked for it, and hopefully people will still want to hear what we have to say about the world of pro wrestling. As you saw in the image prior to, I want to say, and I know Nick didn't necessarily have a lot to do with this guy, but I do want to bring this back up one more time. Jason Young, Doc Young, was one of my previous co-hosts of the show back when I did it with Les Thatcher. We had a good probably 2-year run maybe prior to Nick coming on and joining me. I just found out that he passed away earlier this year. I remember him reaching out to me actually a couple of years ago just to kind of touch base and talk. And it was the last time that we had spoken. Praying for his family and friends, close friends. And Doc, just want to say, if you're listening in and watching down on us, I appreciate everything that you did for the Voice of Wrestling, and rest in peace, my friend. So either way, now Nick, we got a lot to obviously talk about. And by the way, I don't know if people saw this, the little caricatures. Did you see those, Nick? I sent those over to you. Somebody did up some caricatures for us and stuff. And
I did. You texted those to me. I thought that was. Who did that? I thought maybe you were doing that for show promotion. That was
no. I don't know who exactly did it, but that turned out pretty good, man. It looks a lot like me.
That's
although
amazing.
I've got better teeth than I do.
I feel like yeah,
I've got better teeth, but nevertheless, I mean, and you look.
I thought I looked phenomenal.
Yeah, you look great. Yeah, you look great in that thing.
Whoever did that, since we've been on hiatus, or I'm now a married man, since you know this, obviously, but maybe some of the fans don't. So whoever did that drawing of us would be great if that person could maybe come over here and do a version of my wife, since all of these pictures look a lot better than they do in real life.
Oh,
it'd be great if I could get a drawing of my wife.
Right, that looks like right.
I can either just have that while she's at work and I can enjoy that, or I might be able to just have that permanently tattooed over her real face. And now we have something that's artistically pleasing, and I have a wife upgrade.
And I haven't had
please reach out.
I haven't had the opportunity to meet her yet, but I'm going to message her and make sure she watches this particular clip, just so you have a little bit of fun time.
I'm sure, just like she loves watching wrestling with me every Sunday. This weekend
this is
her
really second
great weekend for her.
Yeah, this will be the second most important show she watches all week. Yeah.
There was huge issues because you're a Cowboys fan. You had the late game last night. She's from Philadelphia. She's an Eagles fan. and I don't care about either of those teams. I'm a Survivor Series fan. So we had, I mean, between you, myself, and her, there would have just been chaos in this house last night with me trying to watch wrestling and the two of you trying to argue over football.
Yeah, and I wanted to like her. I could have done without her without knowing she was a Philly fan. So she already loses some points. And, of course, on my end, guys, for what I've been doing for the past however long, I actually had a second child. He is 6 months. Lucas Cash is his name. So, yeah, man, we've grown up a little bit since we've been gone, Nick.
Grown up.
Which is kind of crazy. But, look, I know you guys are here, obviously, to hear what we think about the world of professional wrestling, and what a great time to come back also, because Survivor Series was last night and plenty of things to kind of talk about coming out of that. Let's start real quick, though. Nick, you've been involved, and just so everybody kind of knows where our thoughts and our opinions come from, you've been involved in pro wrestling this entire time. I did take a step back, had a lot of other business things that I got into during that time frame. I'm sure some of that stuff will come up over the coming weeks as we air all these shows and air everything that we've been doing. But you've been involved, and let's talk a little bit just kind of before we jump into Survivor Series and all the big stuff that's going on currently, the state of affairs in WWE and just pro wrestling in general. I've been watching quite a bit in the last several weeks, getting prepared and getting back into it. And of course, sporadically, I would tune in and check out. And of course, I'd follow, ProWrestling.com and everything going on just to keep up with the sport. But has much changed at this point since we've last been on the air? I mean, have you noticed, and not so much in characters or people, but more so just kind of the presentation of WWE, and has it gotten necessarily better, worse? Is it, similar? What would you say as far as the state of affairs from kind of where we left off just even a couple of years ago, what you think about the business now as a fan and, of course, somebody that follows the product?
Yeah, and it's such a big question. It's a very loaded question, obviously. And I think the easiest way to answer it is by saying, a lot has changed. NXT's presence has grown significantly. The state of independent wrestling is probably really in its prime right now. You have companies like Ring of Honor who are flourishing. You have New Japan. You have a sort of a surging interest from American fans or North American fans just outside of Japan. There's a surging interest in Japanese wrestling, New Japan. They were running sold-out shows here in the United States for the first time in 2017. It's the independent scene, and if you kind of want to call Ring of Honor, New Japan, indie promotions, it's a place where ex-WWE and TNA, I don't really know what you call that right now, TNA, Impact Wrestling, it's a place where they can really go now and they can make a lot of money. Cody Rhodes, guys like Cody Rhodes, Austin Aries, they're publicly talking about how, in a matter of months, they will make more money on the independent wrestling scene, maybe in 6-7 months, than they will in over a year in WWE. So It's a place that these guys can go to now, and it doesn't look like a demotion, or at least financially, it's not a demotion leaving WWE. So I think that's a great thing, and I think that speaks volumes toward the interest level in pro wrestling outside of WWE. But the one thing that has remained constant in all of the changes is Vince McMahon. And Vince McMahon is probably the reason why, if 4 years ago the WWE product was in one state, you could look at the WWE product today and say things have changed, but they've pretty much stayed the same. Because the old habits are still there. The guys who are being pushed, the angles that are being pushed, the stories that are being told, they're all still passing through that final buck, which is Vince McMahon. So It's still pretty much the same business. It's business as usual with WWE. A lot of the guys that are on top, some of the guys that we scratch our heads over as to why is this guy getting this push over this guy. It really comes down to Vince McMahon. But I will say the one big influence that the current flourishing of the independent wrestling scene is having on mainstream pro wrestling, and by that I mean WWE and to a lesser degree TNA and Impact, is that look at the guys that we're seeing on the WWE roster now, like the AJ Styles, Shinsuke Nakamura, Kevin Owens, guys who normally wouldn't have that spot are there now, and that's due largely in part to NXT and Triple H. And Triple H taking a real interest in those indie stars and bringing them in through NXT, the Samoa Joes, the guys who are in NXT right now, the Adam Coles, Kyle O'Reilly, Bobby Fish, funneling those guys through the developmental system, which is NXT, and then bringing them up to the WWE main roster.
Well, and one of the things that I definitely noticed was kind of the insurgence of independence, but also specifically there was, and I think when Vince McMahon was in charge of these decisions, there was a curse on TNA and Impact wrestlers. They would not bring those guys over despite how talented they are. And of course you see how they're used now in an AJ Styles or a Samoa Joe, even a Bobby Roode. And clearly it's become a situation and an environment where WWE doesn't care where this talent comes from. At the end of the day, they have now this developmental program that has flourished. It was obviously around when I was here, but it is now gone to an entirely new level. And of course, Nick, you and I are going to talk about NXT and somehow in some of the ways where it even kind of overshadows during some of these big weekends and stuff, what the actual big pay-per-views are doing. From SummerSlam or Survivor Series and of course TakeOver this past weekend. And so there's a lot to obviously talk about. The landscape has changed, but of course, as you mentioned, Vince McMahon is still at the helm, and it really is a lot the same as well. But let's go ahead and now talk about Survivor Series and jump right into it. Nick, this was probably the first pay-per-view that I've watched, honestly, since SummerSlam. Of course, I watched WrestleMania. I was really impressed. I mean, if I took a step back, even though I knew some of the stuff that was going on and some of the people that were involved and some of the new stars that have kind of been created in the last couple of years since you and I were on the air, I would admit that coming into it, just kind of taking a back seat to it all as far as any preconceived notions and just watching as a fan, I was really impressed with, from top to bottom, how good the wrestling was, number one, how good the characters seemed to be buying into it. Everything seemed to just kind of flow really well. From what the women's match was really good, in my opinion. I thought they tore the house down. And of course, a lot of these other matches were also very, very good that we're going to get into. But overall, I know Survivor Series, I personally thought it was a pretty good show. Now, I don't have a ton to compare it to besides the other couple of big shows this year. Nick, what did you think just overall, your general thoughts on the show as a whole?
I agree with you, and it's interesting that you are coming in with this perspective. I think both of our perspectives are interesting at this time right now because I'm somebody coming in who obviously has been, following the product very closely during the years that we've been off the show. And you bringing it in, is almost sort of a casual fan perspective.
Sure.
I mean, I don't think anybody's ever going to call you a casual fan.
Right.
You know a lot more than a casual fan, but at least your eyes on Survivor Series were probably a bit more from a casual standpoint.
Yeah, they're fresh.
You're just kind of picking it up, fresh, and enjoying the product, and just enjoying the show that you're seeing, not necessarily knowing what you might know, which is that unbelievably, this pay-per-view underwent so many changes in the weeks leading up to it. I mean, first of all, the match of the night, which I think everybody will agree on, was Brock Lesnar versus AJ Styles, was supposed to be, just 2 weeks ago, Brock Lesnar versus Jinder Mahal. When Jinder Mahal was the WWE champion. You had a big title change when SmackDown taped over in the UK, and that forced the main event change at Survivor Series. John Cena was actually penciled in to be the special guest referee of the Jinder Mahal versus Brock Lesnar match. That ended up being scrapped. John Cena ended up making his return to the pay-per-view as planned, but in an in-ring capacity, joining Team SmackDown. The Alexa Bliss match, that was originally supposed to be Alexa Bliss versus Natalya. As we saw on SmackDown just last week, Charlotte Flair won and forced that match change. So the whole landscape of the card would have been different. And I think all of the changes that were made were definitely for the better. And I think it was a very good pay-per-view. But again, I'm going to be one of those guys that didn't mind the finish of the pay-per-view, which saw the old guys in Triple H and Kurt Angle. The focus was sort of placed on them in the match, as opposed to what I think a majority of fans wanted, which was for there to be the emphasis on the younger guys, the Finn Balor's, the Samoa Joes. Those guys were they got their stuff out of the way early on in the match. They were eliminated. And then the focal point was really what's going to happen with Triple H and Kurt Angle going forward. And I know that left a lot of people feeling down about the end of the main event. It just really didn't bother me as much because I still think the focal point coming out of the match was Braun Strowman. He was sort of the guy that was standing tall. He's that younger, new talent. So I really didn't mind the Kurt Angle versus Triple H thing. But again, I'm a bit more of a nostalgia fan too. I like the idea of Kurt Angle, Triple H, whether that's going to be at Royal Rumble or WrestleMania. So I didn't mind the finish of the main event last night as much as most people did. But on the whole, I thought it was a very solid paper.
Well, and I know on ProWrestling.com, and of course now that we have VLW, I'll be getting a lot of feedback from fans going forward and kind of get a consensus. Real quick, have you? I don't know if you've taken any polls, if you've seen some of the comments, if you've seen some of the reactions so far, besides the finish, and as you mentioned, some people may be preferring they keep a little bit of the spotlight on the younger guys as opposed to it being so much about Triple H and Kurt Angle. Have you noticed, is the general opinion of most internet fans, which are kind of obviously the toughest to please, are they giving it a thumbs up as far as the show as a whole?
Yeah, well, the poll that we ran via ProWrestling.com, and guys, you can follow ProWrestling.com on Twitter at PW_.com. That's at PW_.com. We took a poll last night, and it's really tied. 38% give it an A and a B. So, it was positive reviews, at least from ProWrestling.com fans. 13% voted C, and only 11% voted D or below. So yeah. It was a tie between the A and the B rating, which at least tells you that fans enjoyed the pay-per-view overall. And I think one of the reasons why this pay-per-view was more successful than either other Survivor Series in the past or the Raw versus SmackDown concept is because this year, I think WWE did a really good job of selling Raw versus SmackDown. Usually people don't really care. They used to do that pay-per-view bragging rights, I think it was called, that was the annual Raw versus SmackDown, and just nobody cared. Nobody cared if Raw won. Nobody cared if SmackDown won. There was no because WWE doesn't spend the rest of the year doing Raw versus SmackDown. So all of a sudden it kind of comes out of nowhere. 3 weeks before the pay-per-view, suddenly everybody's supposed to care about this brand warfare. Well, this year, and I think since the brand split happened with WWE, and you had the emergence of, it was initially Mick Foley over there on Raw, who was the general manager, along with Stephanie McMahon, who was the commissioner. That turned into Stephanie McMahon remaining as commissioner, and then she brought in Kurt Angle. And then over on the SmackDown side was Shane and Daniel Bryan. Shane's been very active in the ring. He's been great. His performances in the ring at WrestleMania against Undertaker, the Hell in a Cell match against Kevin Owens was absolutely amazing. I think that's brought a lot of enjoyment in the Raw versus SmackDown thing. And then I think they did a really good job of the Raw versus SmackDown build heading into Survivor Series this year. So I think that's maybe the reason why people enjoyed it more. Was because you really, going in to those elimination matches, you really cared. Baron Corbin and The Miz, say what you want about the match last night, but my God, that was some of the best build heading into the match with all that personal stuff that they were doing with Corbin taking shots at Maurice and her being pregnant with his baby. I mean, that got really personal. Yeah. Miz cursing in promos, that they were releasing on YouTube. So I think the build overall was very good. And so I think that's the reason why people bought into this more than they have previous SmackDown versus Raw incarnations.
Let's talk a little bit about the AJ Styles and the Brock Lesnar, and let's go back a little bit to something that you kind of alluded to, Nick, and brought up in the sense that it wasn't supposed to be AJ Styles versus Brock Lesnar. Obviously, it's supposed to be Jinder Mahal versus Brock Lesnar, and I think that I don't have too many theories on this, and maybe there's more known. Maybe you've reported about it over on ProWrestling.com of why some of these changes were made. But one of the things, I remember talking with David Chisholm, which, by the way, guys, shout out to David Chisholm, my cousin. He's going to be having a segment on Voice of Wrestling. He's a huge wrestling fan, of course, and a big fan of VOW. We have a segment called David Dishes that we're introducing tonight towards the tail end of the show. So stick around for that, and he'll be telling you his thoughts on Survivor Series from last night. I was talking with him, and he was asking me what was going to happen with Jinder Mahal and how long he was going to keep the championship and how long and whether or not he'd become a two-time champion. And I kind of likened it to JBL. You know, he was a guy that nobody really thought a heel, that nobody thought should have been champion at the time that he obviously became champion, but they kept it on him long enough to the point where it became credible in the sense that once he lost it to somebody, it was going to end up meaning something. And of course, as we all remember, I do give a lot of credit to JBL as far as catapulting John Cena to kind of superstardom and starting him on that huge rise. And so I kind of looked at him to be that way, but then yet I did not envision him to lose. In fact, when I first heard about what was kind of going on in the Brock Lesnar versus Jinder Mahal match, I had Jinder going over Brock. I mean, I really felt like this was going to be their way to push Jinder Mahal to such a level that then once he goes back and loses the title to someone like a Kevin Owens or an AJ Styles, it means more. Obviously, that has turned. So, Nick, that turned around, and of course, they went in a much different direction. And we just found out that AJ Styles versus Jinder Mahal in a title match is going to happen this Tuesday on SmackDown. So, Nick, first and foremost, kind of take us back real quickly. Remind me of why they made this change, if there are definitive reasons for that, and then obviously talk a little bit about what you think might take place going forward and whether or not Jinder could win that title back, because maybe his title run was cut a little short and a little surprisingly from what they originally intended.
Well, it is very possible. The one thing that could indicate Jinder Mahal winning the title back on Tuesday night would be the fact that WWE is traveling to India, and they are going to be running the One India Super Show on December 9th in New Delhi. Now, they have already announced that Jinder Mahal's opponent at that show will be Triple H. So, you know, I'm not sure, and it was supposed to be two live events taking place on December 8th and December 9th. Jinder Mahal was going to be headlining both shows, but due to what I believe, and I think the general consensus was just lack of ticket sales and lack of, general enthusiasm about the show, WWE made the decision to cancel one of the events and just make it one super show on December 9th. And that could be a testament to what people really think of Jinder Mahal. And just to throw my own opinion in there, the top guys in India, the top stars in India are the same top stars as the guys who are in this country, in North America. Guys like Roman Reigns, John Cena, AJ Styles, Brock Lesnar. These are the top guys all around the world for WWE. Jinder Mahal, just because he's Indian, certainly it does give him a boost there. There is more of a fan base for him there. But the top stars in that country are still your Roman Reigns, your Dean Ambrose, Seth Rollins, the top guys that you see on SmackDown and Raw every week. Those are still the top guys around the world. And so I think if those shows on December 8th and 9th, if those were blockbuster sellouts, and WWE was really, really wanting to make a giant impact on India, I don't think they would have stripped Jinder of the title prior to Survivor Series, because I think they would have gotten away with having Brock Lesnar versus Jinder with the star power of John Cena being added to the match as the special guest referee. You could tease everything in there. Is John Cena going to screw one of them? Is John Cena going to screw Brock Lesnar? Teasing a potential John Cena, Brock Lesnar rematch down the line, or even teasing John Cena versus Jinder on SmackDown for the title after Survivor Series. You could have drummed up enough interest, but I think Tuesday night is going to be very telling as to how WWE really values Jinder Mahal as a main event guy. If he wins the title back on Tuesday night, then I think it's going to be very important for WWE that Jinder comes into that WWE Super Show in India on December 9th as the champion. But if AJ Styles retains, then I think WWE knows that if they give you that, that Jinder Mahal versus Triple H non-title match where there's no title on the line, that's interest enough.
Sure.
And that they can keep the title on a guy like AJ Styles, who obviously is going to give you the better match like he did at Survivor Series last night, who's going to give you better matches going on forward. But, look, Brock Lesnar is a Raw guy. So it's not like AJ Styles versus Brock Lesnar is going to continue on SmackDown. It's not. Right. Those are your two separate brand champions. I fully expect Jinder Mahal versus AJ Styles to continue through into Royal Rumble, or at least into the first of the year. We're getting into that time where there's no Raw pay-per-view now. So the next month's pay-per-view in December, Clash of Champions, that's a SmackDown pay-per-view.
Right.
So that will be probably, a Jinder Mahal. My guess would be a Jinder Mahal versus AJ Styles, some kind of stipulation match for the title. You'll probably see that feud continue heading into the first of the year, and then after the first of the year, we'll see where we go heading into Royal Rumble.
Well, and let me also say, too, just kind of talking about Jinder Mahal, not to go on any type of rant, but I think that one of the issues that I find with WWE is when you have a foreign wrestler who obviously comes from, kind of a different culture, and WWE wants to play into that culture. They do it with such consistency and frequency now. I feel like fans are just immune to it, and it's hard. And of course, they're always heels. They're always heels in that regard most of the time, unless fans turn them on their own. I feel like this is kind of a classic case, because when I look at Jinder Mahal, number one, he looks phenomenal, and he talks good. Like he's a good talker as well. It's not as if this guy is some chump. I feel like if given the right, I think that he's got more than enough potential to do it. But when you talk the same stuff, the anti-America role in professional wrestling doesn't hold the volume and the weight that it used to decades ago. Right. When everybody watched the news because there wasn't near as much on TV, and you understood how one country and America might actually interact. That's one thing that I've actually started getting more into over the past few years is kind of, just American politics and what's going on. And I think that a lot of people obviously are more involved than they used to be because of social media and things like that. However, the anti-American kids don't care about that stuff, nor do even the kids of today, nor do their parents care so much that this guy is going to talk about his country being better than America. It just doesn't fly like it used to and doesn't carry as much weight. And so I feel like someone like Jinder Mahal, while never would have been my first choice, and when you put him on a list with every other wrestler in WWE who should be probably in that role, I don't know that he tops the top 20. I feel like it's a situation where I do think, number one, he's impressed me compared to what I expected him to do in this role. But he's limited, and it's not his fault. Now, I'm not saying that I want to see him as a champion and in that spotlight role for the next 3 or 4 years. I don't necessarily think he's ever going to be that. But take a guy like Cesaro, who used to kind of have a similar anti-America heel character. He doesn't really do that as much anymore. Obviously, him and Sheamus kind of play that together, but it's not their core focal point, and that's obviously something that I think WWE really needs to get away from, and not to bring race into this or anything like that, but kind of the same thing with African Americans. It's like The only role that they can see that is by having them play what they think the stereotype of black people should be. I just feel like WWE needs to really maybe think outside the box a little bit, expand their horizons, realize that the things that you think with millennials and kids these days, the things that used to bother people that would get over 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago doesn't really resonate with the audiences of today. They want to see just kind of real badasses wrestling other badasses, whether it's heel or babyface or the other, and give them the ability to kind of get out and be themselves. And I think that's what normally will take a guy like Jinder Mahal and give him a new life, so to speak, is when he kind of sheds this anti-America gimmick that he's got going on, starts elevating what he talks about, what he does, and kind of gets out of this classic, anti-American heel that WWE has tried to shove down our throats so many times. So obviously, I agree with you. I think Tuesday is going to be a very telltale sign as to what's going to happen coming into, what's going to go forward, because I was really surprised by the title change at the where was the event in the UK, right?
The UK,
yeah. So I was surprised by that.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're going to. If you're going to call it real quick before we move on, Nick, does he win the title back or not?
No, I mean, not after what we saw at Survivor Series last night
with
AJ. The epic match between Brock Lesnar and AJ,
which is a good,
cannot see how right now you are going to put that title back on Jinder. Again, unless WWE really feels that taking the title off Styles and putting it on Jinder is going to give Jinder this massive heat that, people could just be so pissed off that they put the title back on Mahal that, he garners this tremendous heat that he wasn't getting before. I could possibly see that happen, but I just don't understand how, after what we saw at Survivor Series.
And let me also,
night,
so this will be kind of a good way. This will be a good way to segue into AJ Styles and Brock Lesnar, because here's the thing: as you're talking about how does WWE feel about Jinder Mahal, one of my questions is what does Vince McMahon, Triple H, the guys that matter, what do they actually think about AJ Styles? Now, I'm sure Brock and Paul Heyman and a couple of the core guys backstage were pushing. Obviously, we heard you mentioned this to me as far as I don't know if you mentioned on the show or not, but Brock obviously really pushing for this match with AJ Styles, and so. Does WWE feel the same way about AJ Styles that Brock Lesnar and, of course, Paul Heyman think about AJ Styles? And when you kind of consider his background, he's not necessarily WWE made. He's even using his own name, obviously. This is one of those things that's always bothered Vince McMahon in the past, as evident by how he would push guys that came from another organization, obviously WCW most notably. So is Vince McMahon willing, and maybe, Nick, over the past couple of years, you've seen signs and evidence that would support he's willing to push some of these guys from other companies that have kind of made a name for themselves outside of it, whether he gives credit or credence to TNA and what they are or not. It could be, have you seen evidence to support that Vince McMahon is not going to hold that fact against AJ Styles? And at the end of the day, I think going forward at this point, if he loses the title or not, I think it's going to be a very much a telltale sign to help me decide, or at least see what they think of AJ Styles, as much as I think it's obviously going to be a telltale sign for Jinder Mahal as well.
Oh, I think everyone, including Vince McMahon, views AJ Styles as a main event player. AJ Styles is one of the few guys that, you look at a guy like Shinsuke Nakamura. Vince took his whole entrance away from him when he came up to the main roster. There are so many guys that have been put in, I don't think anybody feels that Shinsuke Nakamura has been booked. I don't think he's been booked poorly since he moved to the main roster, but I don't think he's nowhere near being booked to his potential. And that could be because of the talent that they're pairing him up with. Feuds like Baron Corbin don't do Shinsuke Nakamura any justice. I mean, my God, last night at Survivor Series, we saw Finn Balor and Nakamura work together for 2 minutes? And it was the best 2 minutes of the match. When you see Nakamura working with guys that he can really go with, you see his potential. But guys like Kevin Owens, AJ Styles, those are two guys that WWE really hasn't screwed up yet. You know,
Sure.
and Kevin Owens came through NXT. AJ Styles did not have to do that. He debuted at the Royal Rumble, and since then he has been strong and solid on SmackDown, on the main roster ever since. He's been a top guy. He's not been booked horribly. He's not been booked in terrible feuds. I mean, look, creatively, you could say you like this or you didn't like that. I mean, nobody's booked perfectly. But I think there is enough in what he's done right now consistently to suffice the argument that he is considered a top guy in WWE, and he will be used as a top guy in WWE. Now, even if they take the title off of him on Tuesday night, that doesn't mean he's going to be suddenly relegated to pay-per-view pre-shows from here on out. It's just whether or not WWE feels like, you know, there's certain guys that don't need titles. You know, AJ Styles is a top guy with or without a title. You know, they might feel that Jinder is going to benefit from a title run. You know, and not to get back into that, I disagree. I just think Jinder Mahal is a mid-card talent. I think he's a solid mid-card talent, but I just don't see him as a main event player. And that's even, forget about whatever creative they give to him. But going back to AJ Styles, no, I think he is, whether Vince McMahon believes he's the top guy in the company or not, I think the decision makers in that company, including Vince McMahon, at least believe he's a top star. He's a main event guy in the company. Otherwise, I think we would have seen the defamation of AJ Styles a long time ago in the company.
Well, and I don't think anybody that's been following his career could say that he's not or should not be a top star. And so it'll be interesting to kind of see, obviously, what they do just in the immediate going forward of whether they keep the title on him. Do they get him out of this feud with Jinder Mahal here fairly quickly? Does Jinder Mahal, go back to kind of where you think, obviously, he needs to be? And so it'll be kind of interesting to see on SmackDown. Now, talking about Brock, one of the things I did want to mention is, I guess you reported as well on ProWrestling.com, the selling of the leg injury. It looked like his knee kind of buckled while he was trying to perform the final F5, obviously. And then, of course, he did the crazy sell job afterward. I guess you reported as well that it was even in the back. But as far as we know, that is not a legitimate shoot injury, correct?
Correct. Dave Meltzer of F4WOnline.com reported earlier today that was a complete sell job, and Brock Lesnar even went to the extent of selling the injury backstage afterward. I think he wanted people to legitimately believe he was injured. That's how much he was really willing to sell for AJ Styles. And Meltzer sort of speculated that was just due to Brock Lesnar's respect for Styles and how much he enjoyed working with him. I mean, my God, I have not seen Brock Lesnar work that length of a match or sell that much for someone in years. Certainly he sells for guys, but it's usually in a 6-7 minute match. Goldberg, Samoa Joe, some of the recent matches he's had this year, they're really no longer than 6, 7, maybe 8 minutes. I mean, this was a pay-per-view length match. Brock Lesnar sold for this guy. He really made AJ Styles look like $1 million. But yeah, for anyone that is wondering, it was not a legitimate injury, and as far as we know, Brock Lesnar is 100% healthy.
Well, and let's talk about a little bit about. I mean, what do they do at this point with Brock? I mean, I think on the Raw roster, I mean, obviously he's kind of run the gamut on guys that we would want to see him with, and we're now getting into a point where. Skip this next month. You're heading. I mean, we're right around the corner for the road to WrestleMania again, and so obviously Brock Lesnar is going to be involved in that. And let me first just real quick ask you: does he still have aspirations of returning to the UFC, or is that kind of done at this point? I mean, do we know how long his contract is, how long he has left, which might give us kind of a little bit of a sign of what might happen long-term for him. But I'm assuming he's at least going to be here till Mania.
Yeah, his contract expires at WrestleMania. As a last word, it's over WrestleMania 34. Obviously, both sides have the option of renewing. and moving forward. There was interest, I think, in a John Jones fight for Brock Lesnar. Since then, there have been issues with John Jones. So, I think there has been interest for Brock Lesnar in returning to UFC, but there's nothing definite right now. There also is nothing definite regarding his future in WWE. I think it is worth asking that question. The plan right now, and it's been the plan literally since, the beginning of the summer this year, is for Lesnar versus Roman Reigns, to headline WrestleMania 34 for the Universal title. With the idea being, that Brock Lesnar is kind of going through everyone on his way there. He's working with guys like Samoa Joe. There's still the possibility, and they're teasing a match between Finn Balor and Brock Lesnar. But, he's kind of working through that whole Raw roster, and I think it is a very valuable question to ask once we get to WrestleMania 34. Brock Lesnar versus Roman Reigns. My guess would be the title change takes place there. It's Roman Reigns finally being able to knock off Brock Lesnar, who's the guy who's been holding the title for as long as he has. He's been unstoppable. He's tearing through everyone on the roster. Reigns is the guy that finally ends it and wins the title. What's left for Brock Lesnar after that? Does he stick around? What is his worth to WWE after WrestleMania 34? Who do we really want to see him work with? Does he become that Undertaker guy who returns at every WrestleMania and has a match? As it is right now, he really only wrestles maybe about a half a dozen matches in the year anyway. He's a limited guy. He's considered a part-timer anyway, even though he is the Universal Champion. But what really is the point? There's no point in having an Undertaker around for 5-6 matches during a year right now. After WrestleMania 34, what really, and I think I'm really asking myself this question right now, I don't even know if I know the answer right now. What is the value in Brock Lesnar after WrestleMania 34 should he drop the title to Roman Reigns? Personally, right off the bat, I think to myself, he becomes that guy that is your WrestleMania guy. He's that sort of Undertaker WrestleMania guy that we know is going to have a match at the big pay-per-view. You find him a big opponent. He still has that dominance in him, so he could be used to potentially help put over new talent at WrestleMania. Maybe you come up with something where, no one can really go the distance with Brock Lesnar. AJ Styles did it last night. But really, Brock Lesnar's knocking guys off within 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes. So maybe he's that guy that can sort of push. Talents can push him, and he can push talents to have that longer match at WrestleMania. Other than that, I really don't know. And I welcome people's comments. What would be his role in WWE after WrestleMania 34?
Yeah, and I agree with you. I don't know that anybody could say what the role would be. I obviously, he's not the type of guy that really is going to stick around and do much behind the scenes. So he's either on-screen character, involved, or he's not. And you think about it, it really just is going to come down to his desires. And when you think about his limited schedule somewhat now over the course of a year, limited dates, he's kind of got it made easy, and he deserves that. He's a huge star, always going to be the attraction that he is now. So I don't think that it would be something too unreasonable of fans to understand. Now, obviously, take the title off of him, bring him back on some, maybe 2-3 times a year to help kind of put over these stars that you're looking for. I agree. I think Roman Reigns makes a lot of sense. Another guy, I know that they've obviously faced off and everything, but obviously so has Roman Reigns and Brock. I'm really curious to kind of what they do with Braun Strowman at this point. I mean, I know, which we can kind of now jump into that, but as far as Brock is concerned, I think WrestleMania, there's a couple of options. Obviously, Roman Reigns makes sense. I wouldn't be surprised if Braun Strowman and Brock Lesnar somehow came out of everything going forward. That could be an interesting matchup depending on which way they want to go with both of those guys. So that marquee matchup is something that I could see between now and WrestleMania one more time on a big stage or at WrestleMania. And then another one that I'll throw out there, which maybe he's wanting to come back. But, he mentioned, I think The Rock actually mentioned Brock was one of the guys that he would maybe want to wrestle if he came back. So, of course, that would be something that I could obviously see happening at WrestleMania, especially if it might be the last WrestleMania for a while for Brock, or at least the last pay-per-view we see him on for a while until maybe even the following WrestleMania. So I think there's a few different ways that they could go. The most logical and most likely is probably Roman Reigns. I think The Rock would be one if he decides he wants to come back for another WrestleMania. I think that one makes a lot of sense as well. And so let's kind of jump into then on the other side of it now with the final matchup on last night's pay-per-view, the 5-on-5, and what's going to happen here at this point now with Braun Strowman going forward as well. I mean, this guy is someone that at the end of the day, even last night, proves yet again, Nick, that they are 100% very much high on this guy. And he is, I don't remember a heel, Nick, that they've built as strong as they have built him and continue to do so. Normally, and Umaga is always the one that comes to my mind, but when you think of the guys that they build up and just have them, ramshot through everybody, once they get beat, they're kind of Rusev, for example, is now kind of relegated to, he was that guy for a little bit. So they never stick the course with these types of guys, and they have done so with Braun Strowman, and it's been impressive. He continues to impress, and last night obviously seemed to kind of set up something with Braun Strowman and Triple H. When that'll happen, you assume it'll be between now and WrestleMania, maybe Rumble or WrestleMania would be my guess, but that seems to be obviously very likely. So I guess, Nick, Braun, I kind of fit in a very similar boat as Brock Lesnar. I mean, he probably has some others that he could work with, but who really makes sense at this point unless you're talking about a guy like a John Cena-esque, or in this case, obviously a Triple H, that is believable enough to challenge Braun and make it interesting, suspend our disbelief, so to speak. I mean, is there anybody that you see, obviously, outside of Triple H?
Well, I mean, it's a Roman Reigns. I mean, the thing is, with the plan being Roman Reigns versus Brock Lesnar, and Roman Reigns is the big dog right now, and he's the guy that they're sort of grooming, to be this sort of next Brock Lesnar, or at least top guy.
The top guy, right.
Last night's booking of John Cena was very interesting to me. There was a point last night where I felt like, oh, I see, they're going to go down this road where everybody from SmackDown is going to be eliminated, and it's going to end up being all 5 guys from Raw are left versus John Cena and Shane.
Right.
And then Shane's going to get eliminated, and then Superman John Cena is going to eliminate everybody on Raw, and he's going to win, and his music's going to hit. But his role in that match was virtually nothing. He came, he punched his card, he made a little appearance in the match, and he was gone. And there was very little emphasis put on him. So John Cena's future in the company, who knows? He's definitely winding down. His movie career is taking off. Roman Reigns is the guy that's being groomed as the next man in WWE, the next top guy in WWE. So where does that leave Braun Strowman? Because personally, I could see Braun Strowman facing Brock Lesnar. The Brock Lesnar-Braun Strowman match was very interesting to me this year. I mean, AJ Styles did more against Brock Lesnar than Braun Strowman did. And people were looking forward to Strowman versus Lesnar as the big man match. I mean, people were expecting a knockdown drag out, and it wasn't much of anything.
Sure.
Brock Lesnar made pretty quick work of Braun Strowman. So Strowman's in an odd place right now. It's a good question to ask because personally, I would have preferred to see Strowman face Lesnar. I would have preferred for the match that they had earlier this year to never have taken place, and for them to build towards Strowman Lesnar at WrestleMania 34. Strowman crushes Lesnar, wins the title, and now Strowman is this big beast that you have to beat. But that's the direction they're going in with Roman Reigns. So, I think they need to continue. I think they're going in a good path with Strowman. The fans are certainly reacting to Strowman. They liked it last night. Strowman's getting a good baby face reaction now. I think he's one of those guys that sort of like a Kevin Owens. And he tweeted something earlier today that said something like, T-shirts are, because he was wearing obviously the Raw shirt last night because he was Team Raw. He tweeted something to the effect of, T-shirts are great to sell, but, I'm not on one brand. I'm my own brand, So they're kind of pushing him as he's got no friends. He's his own guy. He's not aligning himself with anyone. That certainly indicates he has a future against Triple H on the Raw side. And I think that'll be a good match. I think that is a good direction to go in. But it's going to be very interesting to see what role Strowman plays versus the role that Roman Reigns plays. And WWE fans want to see Strowman in that role.
Yeah, they do.
And we'll see, because the next question is we've got the Royal Rumble coming up. Who wins the Royal Rumble? What sets up, Randy Orton won it last year. Who wins the Rumble this year? If you're going to go in the direction of Roman Reigns versus Lesnar, well, then that sort of eliminates Braun Strowman from winning the Royal Rumble because he's on the Raw side. So if Roman Reigns just won the Royal Rumble last year, he's not going to win the Royal. I mean, I'm guessing he's not going to win the Royal Rumble again in January. Right. He would be a very far-fetched shot to win the Rumble in January. So if he doesn't win the Royal Rumble and he's challenging Lesnar for the Universal title at WrestleMania 34, that means a SmackDown guy has to win the Rumble.
Right.
So it's not going to be Braun Strowman. I could now, unless they move Strowman over to the SmackDown side, which could definitely happen. I think that would be a great route to go. You've got the SmackDown champion and whoever it is by that time. If it's going to be an AJ Styles, maybe you have Styles versus Strowman at WrestleMania.
Interesting, yeah.
I think that could be a good route to go to get him over big. But I think WWE is going to use the Triple H versus Braun Strowman route at WrestleMania. And that'll be an interesting match. Because I think that's going to be a match they're really going to have to work hard in selling, because I don't know if that's the match people want to see Braun Strowman in at WrestleMania.
Well, and I think that the other part of that too is, can they delay it that long? I mean, at this point after last night, it's like everything needs to be followed up on. You assume tonight on Raw, that's what they start doing. So Braun Strowman versus Triple H, I would be amazed if they can put it off that long. And that kind of leads me to one of my final points as we start wrapping up. It's one of those situations where it's like, let's think about this. This is WWE. And at the end of the day, to think that maybe, yes, they have some thoughts in their head as far as what they want for WrestleMania next year, what could change is just about everything, obviously. And so they have a ton of opportunities. And it's an interesting time right now with WWE and some of the guys that we've obviously talked about tonight, Nick, with the Braun Strowmans, the Roman Reigns, the AJ Styles, obviously Brock Lesnar in his role. John Cena's role obviously has been diminished purposefully, but at the same time, he's going to have a role there in WrestleMania and everything. And I agree, It's going to set it up for some interesting scenarios come Royal Rumble as far as who could win that, because I definitely see a Braun Strowman obviously winning that match or having a chance. But of course, there's going to be a couple other stacked names in that Royal Rumble, and it's going to leave it up for grabs for virtually anybody. And as WWE loves to do, even with Randy Orton, who I think was a huge surprise last year, they love to use the Royal Rumble now as a big surprise thing. So very interesting scenarios going on, but obviously Survivor Series overall, decent for what it was. Raw versus SmackDown doesn't really have a lot of follow-up. There's only a couple of things coming out of last night's pay-per-view that are really going to affect kind of the future right now. But it was interesting to see top to bottom. I thought it flowed well. It was a pretty good, solid broadcast. And to kind of toot our own horns, Nick, I think, hey, most people are so used to Voice of Wrestling having all these technical difficulties and all kinds of crazy shit going on, and yet here we are towards the end of the hour and fairly smooth at this point. So, we did pretty good too from top to bottom. I thought top to bottom.
I feel like one of us is going to just explode right now.
Yeah, the show's not over. I need to shut the hell up.
Yeah, right. First of all, the show is not over, and if we get through the show with no technical difficulties, I wonder if that means it was a bad show.
I know,
because
I think people kind of look forward to our train wrecks. At this point, it's just kind of a part of our show. It's part of our DNA.
Something needs to happen. Like someone, something in the back. My set needs to collapse.
Something.
Because this is a set, by the way.
That's your set. I know. That's not really your kitchen back there. You actually got this huge wall poster behind you for a backdrop. That's not actually your kitchen or living room or anything. Those are not real tissue. Is that tissue paper over there?
Is it what?
Is that a bag, a huge bag of tissue paper, or?
Tissue paper, yes. This is a bag of tissue paper. This is a laundry detergent. These veggie straws. I feel like a weatherman right now because I'm looking at the camera. It's like this is a veggie system straw that's pushing in from the south. It's going to work its way up toward the freezer area by Saturday, which will turn into a giant cold front. Speaking of cold front, there's a picture back there of my wife. That's right over there on the fridge, but I'm thinking see that. But it'd be really funny if I was actually sitting in a giant sports studio, a super professional sports studio, but my backdrop was just an apartment with a kitchen. And this closet, which is my one closet that I have. My wife has everything else in the apartment.
Needless to say, yeah.
But no, we got through the show. We got through the return show with no technical difficulties.
Well, keep in mind, we're pre-recorded. I mean, we're going to start back live before Raw, just like we always did next Monday night. So 7 Eastern, 6 o'clock, or maybe 6:30. I don't know when we're actually going to do it. This is all just kind of we planned this, Nick, 3 months ago, but only actually started planning the show 2 hours ago. So we really don't know exactly where we're going to take this, but we do know for an hour every Monday before Raw, Nick and I, and of course the original Voice of Wrestling show, will be here. And I am hoping, just to kind of set it up for the future, I'm hoping obviously we'll have some guests come on, and obviously like we used to, I would love to have Kevin Kelly come back on occasionally, and Plan B, whatever it may be, some of the original segments that we can kind of spruce up and do some stuff with. And as far as voiceofwrestling.net, guys, have a lot of plans for that. In fact, Adam Gorzelski, one of the longtime friends of the show, obviously, and one of my co-hosts when Nick was MIA over and over again, he's actually setting up a show as well that will be hosted exclusively on voiceofwrestling.net as well. So we've got some other content that we're going to be doing. I'll be doing some review shows, be doing some written pieces on there, and of course for all your news, Nick and Mike Killam are over at ProWrestling.com, so check them out as well. And then until next week, Nick, it's great to be back, man. It's good to see your face again. I'm looking forward to getting into some of all of this stuff as we go forward. And man, enjoy your week. And until next week, brother, I'll see you then.
See you then,
guys. Also, real quick, we're going to go ahead and end with David Dishes. And just so you know, David Chisholm, DL Chiz, he's my cousin. Very, very awesome guy. Now 17 years old. He's going to be coming on periodically as well to talk about wrestling. Is a huge fan. And of course, a huge VLW fan. Had multiple surgeries in the past 10 years. So make sure, guys, give him a lot of support, please, if you can. He really has. He's been nervous all week coming into this, but it is now time for David Dishes, the first edition right here on our return edition of the Voice of Wrestling. And until next time, guys, Nick and I will see you next Monday night right here on VLW. All right, guys, very excited about this. A new segment here on the Voice of Wrestling that we'll have so often with my good buddy and friend, David Chisholm. He's actually my cousin. Chiz for this new segment called David Dishes. And each time David comes on, we're going to talk about the hot topics of pro wrestling. Whatever he wants to discuss, we're going to talk about. And of course, this week, you got to talk about Survivor Series from last night. And so, David, let's go ahead and jump right into it and talk about the pay-per-view from last night. Let's start off with the grade, though, and where you rank this pay-per-view compared to the other pay-per-views of the year.
I would give Survivor Series an A+.
Okay.
And the reasoning behind it, because it filled with more big name stars,
Right.
Triple H, Kurt Angle.
Yeah, no, there was a lot to kind of
Yeah.
look forward to in last night's pay-per-view, and the crossover between Raw versus SmackDown had some really unique matches. There was some matches that a lot of people, obviously the AJ Styles Brock Lesnar match, I think a lot of people were probably looking forward to that match as well, and so there was a lot of good things. But that's still a high score. Would you put Survivor Series? Would you consider it the best pay-per-view of 2017?
No, I won't go that far, because I would say maybe like Royal Rumble of this year
Rumble.
or WrestleMania this year.
Yeah. Okay. Might have topped it. But overall, you really liked the pay-per-view. Where do you want to start off? We're going to talk about some of the key points coming out of last night's show. I know you want to talk about Brock Lesnar, AJ Styles, and, of course, the 5-on-5. But I think you also want to start off with the opening match and the Shield versus the New Day. Of course, Shield goes over. David, dish on the opening match. What did you think about it, and how did you like it to open the pay-per-view?
It was a great match. It really kept you involved and made you think which either team was going to win.
Sure.
And to me, when you had the Shield versus the New Day
Right.
opening the match, that'll make it a must see, for fans to really need to watch it.
Right.
Type thing.
Yeah, and look, the opening match is always really important. It kind of sets the tone, and I thought the two teams went out there and did a really good job. Real quick before we move on to this, though, what do you think is the future of the Shield? I think that a lot of people, probably assume this is a short-lived reunion between these three, because they kind of went off and became single stars really on their own. Obviously, Seth and Dean teaming back up as tag team champions and stuff like that, but and having a little bit of a run. But in the end, what do you expect to see going forward with the Shield?
Well, I do agree behind that. I do agree that this could be a short-lived reunion. I don't see it becoming a full-time as it used to be.
Right.
Because I think when you have Rollins and Ambrose together, I think that's great for having them where they're at, being a tag team, because there was nowhere they're going for them to go.
Sure.
But having Roman Reigns by himself, that's the big part of it. So keep Roman Reigns keep going for the title, and not going back to the Shield reunion.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so you do want it to be short-lived.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
it's
disagree.
probably better like that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I fully agree with you. I mean, I 100% agree. I think it needs to be short-lived. It was kind of fun, but how long they go, I really don't expect it to last that much longer. These guys can kind of go off and do their respective things individually and keep being, kind of the stars of tomorrow, or I guess today. I mean, they're the stars of today, but at the end of the day, they still have a long way to go in kind of being able to carry the company. And I think that Roman is clearly the guy that WWE wants to be, wants to have in that role. And it still remains to be seen whether that's going to happen. But now let's jump into, obviously, AJ Styles and Brock Lesnar, which I do think I was concerned as far as what appeared to be a legitimate injury on Brock's part. I've heard now that that's not the case. No, we talked about it last night, David, not knowing whether or not, right after the pay-per-view, not knowing if it was a serious injury. It's not a legitimate injury. He was just selling, obviously, because he's got a lot of respect for AJ Styles. So overall, first and foremost, what did you think of that match? And what do you think is now kind of next for these two guys?
Well, I mean, okay, it showed Styles had the advantage, throughout the match. But ultimately, the Beast was just too strong. It showed that Brock might have, suffered an injury,
right,
due to that AJ's calf crusher. But it showed AJ to put on a phenomenal show, even though Brock won.
Right.
But now it kind of seems like where I would say could be next. What I found out for this coming Tuesday is that AJ will defend his title
Right.
against Jinder Mahal.
Right. Yeah.
And now I'm kind of like wondering, do you think they'll give it to Jinder now?
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think that was one of the things where I remember telling you that I felt like Jinder Mahal was kind of in the JBL role of being this heel that didn't really deserve, and it took everybody by surprise once he became champion. Clearly, I did not expect him to lose it to AJ Styles. I thought Jinder would go on to wrestle, and I think if WWE kind of had it the way they wanted, it wouldn't surprise me if they did want Jinder Mahal versus Brock. But in the end, obviously, it was probably Brock's decision, Paul Heyman deciding they wanted to go with AJ Styles. And so do I think that they now will end up having AJ Styles lose the match to Jinder, lose the title? I think it's possible. I don't honestly have a prediction for that yet. I was kind of surprised they took it off of Jinder to begin with. So I don't know if they're going to do that to maybe kind of let it get back on Jinder, kind of finish his run, because I think it was obviously cut short, and it was a big surprise in the way they did it with the pre-taped SmackDown. It wasn't even really live when they had him lose the title. So it would not surprise me if they try to give it back to Jinder, let him finish his run, and then maybe let AJ Styles win it, whether it be at a Rumble, whether it be even Mania. But sometimes it's hard to go backwards. Now that you've taken the title off of Jinder, sometimes it's hard to put it back on a guy that you might not necessarily think deserves to be there. Although I give credit to Jinder. I think he did do a lot with it, and he really did kind of start showing signs of a good heel. But I just don't know if the fans really ever took to him the way that they ultimately wanted. So it's going to be interesting to find out, though, what happens. Let's jump into the main event and talk about the 5-on-5 deal. And obviously kind of an interesting swerve at the end of it with Triple H giving the pedigree to Angle. And when it looked like he was going to have Shane McMahon finally beaten and be a part of that winning team. So even though Raw won the match, I think the way they kind of built this up, there's a couple of things coming out of this, one of which I still think they're going to use Kurt Angle getting pinned by Shane McMahon to force him out as the general manager. What do you think?
To me, I think it was just, the match was extremely impressive. Through it all, it showed me like a lot of my dream matches that I got the chance to see.
Sure.
From like anything from the Angle to the Nakamura to the etc.
Right.
But even though it showed me like how dominant Strowman can be.
Yeah. Yeah, no, Strowman was definitely dominant in that match. I mean, they built him up to be huge, and I think coming out of this now, it definitely seems like Braun Strowman and Triple H could be an easy segue now coming out of the pay-per-view. I think Braun versus Triple H would be kind of an interesting way to go. So I think that's kind of what they might have been setting up as well. But as far as Kurt Angle as the general manager or potentially stepping back and maybe becoming a full-time wrestler, what are your thoughts? Do you think he hangs in there as general manager? Do you want him to continue being the general manager?
Well, I would say like kind of both. Because,
Sure.
At the same time when you look at it, you have to look at his health. Health is like, like that problem for him.
Sure, that's very true.
But I think, quite honestly, he's doing a fantastic job as being a general manager. But a lot, like when he was in the first match with the Shield, an unbelievable match for Angle. I think he did an unbelievable job. He looked in great shape, kind of. It felt like he didn't miss a beat. But if it was coming, if it was like mine, so like I would say just make him to still be the manager. Don't make him make it full time.
Sure.
Because that will really kind of hurt Angle some way.
Well, and I definitely think. There's a couple options. Maybe they give him one run as a man, or not as a manager, but as a full-time wrestler before maybe letting him kind of retire, hang it up, at WrestleMania. I can't envision they're just going to let it go without a plan if they do force him out as general manager and give him the full-time wrestling role. I just don't see it being that way for very long, just because, specifically, like you mentioned, he's older, his body worn down, and he's obviously had some health issues as it relates to, physically, especially with the neck issues and everything. So I don't think it'll be long-term no matter what, but it'll be interesting to find out what they do with that. And, of course, whether they do force him out, I think we'll probably see a lot more of the signs. If they don't just get rid of him completely tonight, we'll definitely kind of start seeing if that's the direction they're going in tonight on Raw. So, David, obviously appreciate you joining us here on the return edition of The Voice of Wrestling. And, of course, David Dishes will be a new segment that we come on and talk about some of the hot topics of the week. So, David, once again, man, thanks a lot, buddy, and we'll see you next time.
See you.